Okay, that reminds us that we'll be recording today, but before we get to that, while we're waiting for others to join us, please go to the chat and tell us who you are and where you're coming in from. And we'd love to see who you are. So if you take a moment to do that, and also we'll be using the chat today to raise questions for our panel. So you can use the chat for that purpose as well. We will be recording, as you know, our event today, and we will send you a copy of that recording along with links and any other useful information that comes up. You can put that into the chat, and we'll share the chat as well in an email that will follow this event by a few days. So welcome, I'm Doug Dixon, board chair of Encore Boston Network. Glad to have you all with us this morning. Excited to see everyone, and we look forward to a great discussion from our panel on volunteer service. As we all know all too well, things have changed a lot over the last couple of years in many parts of our lives, but certainly in the case of volunteer service. The pandemic has had a tremendous effect on nonprofits, on the ability of organizations to use volunteer talent. In some cases, the need for volunteer talent has shifted and is even greater. So some people have volunteered that they hadn't before. Some people who had volunteered have not been able to. There are changes in the way that organizations use volunteers, and we want to dig into that a little bit this morning and hear the latest, because things will never be quite the same, I don't think, and it's helpful for us to understand what those changes are as we think about what our lives will be like going forward and how we'll engage. This is National Volunteer Week, as sponsored every year by Points of Light. So one of the reasons that we decided to focus on this topic at this time is to recognize the importance and value that volunteers play in the work that all of our nonprofit and other community-based organizations do. So the esteemed panel that we've pulled together this morning is going to address that topic. And they consist of Chris Woods, who is the Program Officer of Volunteer Initiatives for Massachusetts Service Alliance. Hi, Chris, up in the with the amazing, colorful background. And also Sarah Hamilton, who is the president of Boston Cares, and she'll tell us more about Boston Cares and what they do. Dahlia Cox from United Way of Massachusetts Bay, and Merrimack Valley, Vice President of Volunteer or Engagement. Dahlia, you want to wave so that we see who you are? And Joseph Gonsalves, who runs the AmeriCorps Senior Program for Age Strong Boston and Age Friendly Boston. So what I'd like to do to get us started is to ask each of our panelists to say a few words about who they are, the organization that they're a part of, and what they do to support volunteers. So, and then we'll get into a conversation about the topic that we've teed up for the hour. So Chris, do you want to get us started?
Sure, thanks, Doug. Good morning, everyone. As Doug mentioned, my name is Chris Woods. I am a program officer at the Massachusetts Service Alliance. For those of you who don't know who we are the State Commission on Volunteerism and Service. Every state across the country has a commission dedicated to volunteering. Our main programs really include AmeriCorps and Commonwealth Corps. For those of you who aren't familiar with what AmeriCorps is, it's a year of service that folks can give back to their communities. At MSA, we run through over 25 statewide AmeriCorps programs, including City Year Boston, TerraCorps, Dial Self, just to name a few. And those are where, again, folks are really providing direct services out to different communities across the state that really need them. We also run a program called Commonwealth Corps, which is very similar to AmeriCorps, although it's just a statewide volunteer service year. It's on a much smaller scale, where as an AmeriCorps program, you have to have 10 members. Commonwealth Corps is a bit smaller, where you can have 2 to 4 members who are providing both direct service as well as capacity building efforts to the nonprofit organization that they're serving with. But my main role in what I do at MSA is I really help support volunteerism as a whole across the state. I do that through a variety of different methods. A large portion of my work comes from awarding out grants and small grants to nonprofits and to volunteer programs. A large portion of my efforts over the last 2 years have been supporting our COVID-19 resiliency grants, which have really helped nonprofits and volunteer programs stay afloat and adjust and adapt during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're still in the midst of awarding those grants out to nonprofits and helping support those efforts. I also provide a lot of training and technical assistance to volunteer managers and to nonprofits across the state around how to better engage volunteers. And then coming and speaking at different panels such as these to help sort of spread the words and share updates around what's happening across volunteers in the volunteer sectors in Massachusetts. So happy to be here, and I look forward to having a lively panel with you this morning.
Thank you, Chris. Sarah Hamilton, do you want to tell us about Boston Cares?
Everyone, my name is Sarah Hamilton. I'm the executive director at Boston Cares. I've been with this organization for about 12 years and in this role since 2019. Almost 20 years of experience now has kind of all been in the volunteer engagement sector. So it's something that I have a strong passion for and really means a lot to me. Boston Cares specifically, we partner with nonprofits and schools to expand their capacity and their impact by mobilizing a diverse group of volunteers to address our community's critical needs. We were founded in 1991 with the idea of flexible volunteering, making it easy and accessible for individuals to access volunteer opportunities and find a way to fit that into their lifestyle. So through our model, we work with organizations to determine what needs they have that can be filled by volunteers, and then we recruit both individuals and corporate teams to help address those. Our signature calendar program, I think, is what we're most known for. And so if you visit our website, we have a physical calendar on there that has about 300 opportunities every month that volunteers can sign up for whenever it fits their interest and their skill set and availability. Volunteers join Boston Cares by attending a one-time new volunteer orientation, after which you have basically a lifetime membership to those opportunities, and it's up to you when you want to volunteer. We have some who come on a regular basis. They find something that really speaks to them and they're there every week, and others that pop in and out when their schedule allows. It really helps build some capacity for those nonprofit partners that we serve by giving them an extra stream of volunteers that come in and the additional support from our staff to help manage them, particularly our smaller organizations that are not necessarily the first ones that are going to pop up on a Google search if you're looking to volunteer in Boston. Beyond our calendar program, we also have our Allies for Immigrants program, which is a partnership with English for New Bostonians, where we recruit volunteers to serve as tutors in English language courses and U.S. citizenship preparation classes. And so we have volunteers that do this at least twice a month. This is one where we tell people that there's some flexibility, and we find that they volunteer even more frequently than is needed because they really are able to connect with the students that they're serving and help them advance their English skills, inevitably advancing their economic opportunities here in Boston as well. Beyond that, we also have our MLK Day of Service, which is one of the largest in the area every year. In our pre-pandemic times, this was 600 folks, family-friendly service, all on Dr. King's birthday, honoring his legacy. And we have moved that virtually over the last couple of years. We'll see what 2023 brings. I'm hoping we'll have some sort of hybrid option available there. And we have a robust corporate engagement program as well, where we really work to customize opportunities for our corporate partners that leverage both their human and financial resources for our nonprofit partners. And so through all of that, over the last 31 years, we've engaged we've served over 900 organizations with about 1.3 million hours of service.
Impressive. Great. Thank you, Sarah. And Dolly Cox from United Way.
Yes, good morning, everyone. As Doug said, my name is Dahlia Cox. I am the Vice President of Engagement at United Way of Mass Bay and Merrimack Valley. If you're not familiar with United Way, we are one of the largest nonprofits in the Boston area, serving almost all of the Eastern Massachusetts region. So Merrimack Valley, the North Shore, Greater Boston, the South Shore, and then the Taunton-Attleboro region. We really work and focus on the area of economic justice, and we do that through providing financial opportunity and educational access, I would say, and achievement for folks across the full spectrum of life. And we really at United Way, we act as a convener, right, bringing together all sectors to focus on systemic issues. And so in my role, I really focus on working with our team internally to identify where the skills and talent of individuals and companies and our community partners can be applied to helping to move the needle on some of those issue areas in the community. And so building out both ongoing volunteer opportunities, sometimes one-time volunteer opportunities for groups and individuals, and really matching that with the most pressing needs in the communities we serve. So some of that comes in the form of some of what we consider our signature events. So in fact, we have one coming up on May 7th, where we'll be providing new and expectant families with basic essential needs for their babies. So low income families with diapers and wipes and other essential items. Our other signature event is in the fall, focused on providing families with Thanksgiving meals. And, these are all relatively large scale, right? Serving from 1,000 to 20,000 families. And then in between all of that, really working with folks to dig deep and go deeper. And so we have a platform, I know we'll get to this later, Doug, where folks can learn about opportunities, find what suits them in terms of location and area of interest and skill, and plug directly in with our community-based partners who have come to us in search of volunteers. So really looking forward to our conversation today. I know we're going to dig into the meat here soon. And excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Dahlia. And Joseph Gonsalves, City of Boston.
Yes, good morning. My name is Joseph. I am the Administrative Director of Volunteer Programs for Age Strong Boston. And we run 4 volunteer programs, 2 of which are AmeriCorps senior programs. So we recruit volunteers 55 plus in impact-driven volunteer opportunities designed to keep older adults engaged and in their communities for as long as possible. So we train and recruit volunteers an array of opportunities, whether it be tax prep, bus buddies. So we train volunteers to teach other older adults how to navigate public transportation. Companionship is a big one, respite, and a range of opportunities. We also have our property tax work-off program, which gives qualified homeowners 60 plus the opportunity to volunteer for the City of Boston. And in exchange, we give them a property tax reduction. So that's a yearly program that older adults can tap into. And then we also have our Senior Greeters program, which has been inactive since the pandemic, but still one of our programs. We actually have one of our greeters on here, who I'm very happy to see. Hi, Ellie. So yeah, we run 4 volunteer programs. We manage over 350 volunteers currently. All of our opportunities are still active. Most have adapted due to the pandemic, which I'm sure we'll talk about. I manage a staff of 5, so we have 3 volunteer coordinators who are doing recruitment and outreach, getting volunteers engaged with our programs. And I'm excited for the conversation today and hopefully spreading the word about our opportunities to get more folks engaged in the city of Boston.
Great. Well, thank you, Joseph, and thanks to all four of you for giving us a sneak peek at what you do and how you do it. I see a few people in the audience who could also serve on this panel, so maybe we'll get everybody involved at some point. But to start us off, as I mentioned earlier, we know that there's been impact. And the impact has applied itself in different ways, in different forms, in different sectors. And I'm wondering if the four of you could talk a little bit about the initial impact of the pandemic, and then how that's morphed and what you're seeing now in terms of how things have changed over the last couple of years. Who would like to start us off on that? Sarah, do you want to kick us off on that topic?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, so we definitely saw a lot of impact from the pandemic. We really thought of it as a disaster response when we're thinking about how our volunteers and our programming's changed. So early March, we saw things start to slowly disappear. And by mid-March, there was a day, I think, where we had absolutely nothing on our calendar. And almost overnight, there was this huge increase in need around food insecurity in particular. So we really kind of changed how we did things, how we worked with our partners, and just said, this is clearly the biggest need in the community. This is like responding to a disaster. And so this is what we're going to push out. We saw new opportunities pop up around food insecurity. Schools trying to get food out to students. We also saw some pantries and smaller organizations that we hadn't worked with before who suddenly needed a different set of volunteers. They might have had a couple consistent folks who now maybe they were high risk and they couldn't come out and volunteer anymore. So there were new opportunities and new spots available. And then we saw it kind of slowly transition where we saw other organizations starting to think about virtual volunteering where we could plug that in, but that wasn't an overnight solution. That really took a few months at least to get stood up. And now we're getting to a point where we've seen a lot of that food insecurity has stuck around, even though we are seeing, more people are employed again, the economy is improving in some ways. There's still that need. I mean, it existed before the pandemic as well. So we are still seeing a need for volunteers in a lot of those, in-person and hands-on opportunities, as well as some new virtual opportunities. And I think we're trying to see how that's going to continue to ebb and flow as the COVID pandemic changes. We have some partners who have instituted strong safety protocols around vaccine requirements. We're wondering if those are going to ease up or if we're going to continue to see more add to that list. So a lot of it for us is continuing to kind of roll with all these, changes and punches that come with us, and really deferring to our nonprofit partners. A lot of folks ask what our policies are around safety for getting volunteers out to projects. And we believe that our partners who are on the ground and working with their clients directly have the best answer to that. So we do have partners who I think will require a vaccine and masks for some time because they're working with a high-risk population. And we see our role and finding volunteers to fill that is in really communicating that opportunity and why that's important when you come in. So I think that there's been a lot of changes, and I think we'll continue to see some changes, although not as severe as what we saw initially back in March of 2020 when we had to kind of flip into that disaster mode.
Chris, anything you want to add to that from the MSA perspective?
Sure, yeah. I think Sarah touched on a lot of good points. I think a lot of the needs that we saw arise were coming mostly from our COVID-19 resiliency grants and the applications that we were receiving. And I would say a large portion of populations, like Sarah mentioned, as food security was a huge need. I think another area that really struggled was senior engagement, and there were a lot of organizations that were asking for funding to help engage seniors and keep seniors engaged with their programs, because I think nonprofits really had to adapt to the ways that they were meeting the needs of seniors, whether that be delivering meals instead of hosting daily lunches, or having volunteers come and do prep or tech prep and teach seniors how to get on Zoom so that they can connect with their loved ones. I think that those were probably two of the biggest areas that we saw services shift. Other programs like another grant that I manage is a youth development grant, and we saw a huge challenge for organizations that were trying to engage youth specifically as volunteers, but to also try to meet the needs of youth. since youth engagement was so low, and schools who were trying to get youth on board and onto Zoom, and children who didn't have access to laptops at home. There was a huge need there for quite a long time. And I think now that the pandemic has sort of lessened the impacts on different communities, I would say that there's still a need there. Like Sarah mentioned, I think that there's still a need for food security. And I think, what we tell all of our partners throughout our trainings is to, go through some level of risk management when it comes to bringing volunteers back, and to consider, if you are going to require vaccinations for your staff, is this something that you want to uphold for your volunteers? And if not, what are you going to provide to your volunteers to make sure that they are safe and successful in their roles, whether that be through PPE, or just having them sign waivers, or some sort of contact tracing method to get back to your volunteers in the event that they were exposed to COVID, whether that be through a client or through staff. I think hybrid volunteering and volunteer managers and volunteer programs have somehow been able to adapt technology to even help create or build capacity within their organizations, whether that be engaging, training, and onboarding volunteers virtually just to help build off some of that capacity, but also providing some flexibility for volunteers now in a way that they can, instead of coming in once a week to do tutoring services, they can do that online from the comfort of their home, and do it in a way that fits their schedule more. So in some ways it's helped build capacity at nonprofits, and in other ways it's been a huge need to get more volunteers on board in order to meet those needs that have arisen.
Dolly, how did it look from the United Way perspective?
Slightly different. I would say that the immediate need that we responded to was supporting our nonprofit partners through volunteers, both individuals and through our corporate partners, in navigating a lot of the business side of the pandemic. So when we think about all of the different funding opportunities and getting dollars from the government, which was, if you remember back to 2.5 years, it was so wonky and it was so fast, and there were only so many dollars available for a short amount of time. And frankly, for a lot of smaller nonprofits who aren't bolstered by a board that might have, the expertise to help to navigate that, they really turned to United Way and asked us for that support. And so I would say the first few months of the pandemic, we really focused a lot of our energy in that skills-based volunteer space. Simultaneously, we were doing a whole heck of a lot of fundraising around COVID relief, right? And for communities, so it was a two-pronged approach, and I would say it wasn't until after kind of the initial shock of the pandemic wore off. So maybe June, when people realized, okay, we're here for longer than we originally anticipated, right? That we started to be flooded with requests for volunteering. And I think we can all agree that the pandemic, for a lot of folks who maybe were suddenly seeing the significant disparities in true light, realized, I have more than that I can be giving right now. And so I feel like folks came out of the woodwork interested and excited to volunteer in some capacity. And then navigating how to do that virtually, right? And in safe ways. So, and we did. And then I would say by summer, it really did shift to how can we support those basic needs, right? Of individuals in our communities, both in terms of certainly food access, but also other needs around baby basics and even, clothing and other hygiene supplies. So that was our, that's where we landed at the beginning, for sure.
Good. Joseph, how did it look from City Hall? I know you weren't there.
Yeah.
From your
Yeah.
home.
We almost immediately shifted all of our volunteer opportunities. So RSVP being our biggest volunteer program, all of that is sort of in big group opportunities. So some of our volunteers are in museums, in hospitals, serving in senior centers and community centers. So we almost immediately had to sort of adapt. And the biggest thing we focused on was, isolation in older adults during that period. So our senior companions went to phone calls. We trained them on how to use Zoom so they were able to still connect with their clients virtually. And then a lot of our RSVP volunteers sewed masks for frontline workers. So we immediately thought of innovative ways that they could still serve and also take care of themselves at the same time. A big thing we did, we had volunteers write over 3,000 letters that we then deliver to homebound older adults. So another way of sort of combating isolation. And then, agreeing with them, food security was the big thing as well. Food delivery is actually one of our work plans through our RSVP program. So volunteers early on were still delivering food to older adults who needed it. And then that was a big thing at the Age Strong Commission, sort of across the board. So we have partnered with vendors and we're delivering food to older adults for a great chunk of the pandemic. And then, maybe a year in, volunteers were sort of tired of being at home and wanted to sort of be back out. And that's something we're still sort of challenged with now, with most hospitals and museums not taking folks back, and thinking about how we can still keep folks engaged. Actually, our senior companion program is still sort of hybrid. So we have volunteers 2.5 years now, still making phone calls. And then we have some who are back in the home sometimes, and then doing virtually the other half. So we've adapted pretty early on with all of our programs. Our property tax volunteers are actually back in person now full time, but it was sort of a challenge figuring out opportunities for them to do from home. But I would say we adapted pretty quickly to really combat isolation within older adults in the city of Boston.
Great, good. So, and I just want to take a moment to remind people that if you have questions for the panel, chat them into the chat box, and we'll pick them up along the way or at the end. We have reserved some time for questions. We know that there's been a lot of learning, a lot of adaptations. You've all mentioned already a lot of ways in which things have changed in the early days and have continued to change. What approaches do you see that you think will outlast the pandemic? What good things have we gained from this experience that you think will help organizations better engage volunteers? Who wants to jump in first on that one?
I can take a stab at that. I mentioned this earlier, but I think that transitioning programs and moving some programs into a virtual format has really helped nonprofits and volunteer managers really bring their programs up into the 21st century. And it's almost helped build capacity at these organizations. I think both people who are receiving services or volunteers are realizing that virtual volunteering and getting involved in volunteering that way is sometimes more accessible and more convenient for folks, as opposed to coming to a central office or to a central site to provide those services. I think that there are still obviously going to be those direct services that are going to require in-person volunteer opportunities, such as delivering meals or working in a food pantry. But for example, working with youth and doing online tutoring is a huge example of what we've seen as organizations are continuing to adapt and to still meet the needs of youth as well as engage volunteers. The other side of that too is that I think it also provides an opportunity to engage volunteers virtually in order to build capacity at nonprofits. We've worked with organizations who prior to the pandemic would once a month host an in-person orientation and training for their volunteers and bring all of those volunteers together on, say, like a Wednesday evening and run a 3-hour training. The pandemic has really allowed volunteer managers, and what we've seen with our grantees is they've been able to transition some of those volunteer management and volunteer engagement pieces onto a virtual format. So instead of once a month coordinating a 3-hour training, they can do an online training or recording of that, send it out to their volunteers, and train them virtually rather than having them come in and run that 3-hour training. So it provides that, frees up so much more time in a volunteer manager's schedule to engage more volunteers, to better monitor, to better track those volunteers, and to just enhance the services that they're offering. It gives so much more capacity at an organization. And I think that that's something that will continue to stay and continue to adapt over time, is that sort of like engagement piece. So I think there's a mix of both. I think that, hybrid volunteering and some virtual volunteering components may be here to stay for quite a while, although there is certainly still a need for those direct services as well.
And I would point out that it's probably a lot more convenient for the people who are engaged, who are being engaged, right? Who are participating in those training and other programs. Other thoughts?
I agree with everything Chris said. I think even just thinking about it from a Boston Cares specific perspective, we do an orientation for volunteers. We've run probably 12 of them a month. And before the pandemic, we were trying to figure out ways to make it more accessible. Never once did Zoom cross our mind. It just wasn't in our vocabulary before the pandemic. And I've been asked if we're going to move back to in-person, and we might offer them occasionally if people want to come into our office, but it's so much easier on our staff and on volunteers to get engaged that way, that I think that will definitely stay for us. And, to your point, Doug, about for those being served on virtual opportunities, I mean, there's a lot to be gained from an in-person connection. I think we all realize that after the last couple of years, but I look at our Allies for Immigrants program. And if you're a parent of young children and you've got a full-time job and you're trying to fit your English classes in, that you have to get on a bus to go downtown, to go to a space to have this class, it's so much easier if you can jump on Zoom and have your kids in the background. So it's making it easier for that folks to engage that way too.
Great. Anything else? Joseph or Dolly, you want to add anything to that?
No, I agree with everything they said. I know because I actually conduct a training for our senior companions, which is normally a 4-day training in person, and being able to do that over Zoom, I can see is already accessible for folks wanting to come on, but it's also a lot easier on our staff, as everybody mentioned, to focus on other areas of engagement for volunteers. So, yeah.
What are you seeing from the perspective of the nonprofits? Do you think that they are wanting to get back to in-person direct service, or do you think that they are also reconciled to the fact that Zoom and other, virtual ways of connecting are here to stay in terms of the work that they do? And in particular, I mean, we think, those of us who think about volunteer service sort of categorize service, right, into skills-based volunteering, people who provide support for the office and other sort of administrative components of the work, the people who deliver the service directly to the people who are being supported, as well as, the service days and other kinds of ways that people engage. Those are different ways of thinking about this. And I'm wondering if that makes a difference in terms of how either you as an engagement organization or the nonprofits that benefit from the work that you do are likely to see this over the long term.
I'm happy to start. I would say outside of educational services, right, that were more classroom based, and we know that all went virtual for a significant period of time, right? But our partners were really back in person very quickly. I mean, they're just, the need is so great, right? So when we think about everything from a food pantry, where you literally have to have people there to make sure that those shelves are stocked and that folks are getting that food, to, you know, early childcare, like, you know, early education childcare providers who have been in the trenches from the beginning, and folks who are, you know, perhaps they're making home visits now or doing some home-based care, but they're still out in person. They've been back in action for a while, and you know, taken all of the safety precautions, right? I think, and lived through some really impossible circumstances, if we're being honest, in terms of and succeeded, right? They've been phenomenal. So we've heard loud and clear from our partners for a long time that, you know, there's nothing like the in-person. And so that's coming back. I mean, we're hearing it also from on the other side from our corporate partners and individuals. They want to be back out in the community. So, you know, I think what is going to be interesting, because what we're also seeing is how folks are wanting to spend their time now. We've had the last 2 years for a lot of real significant reflection. And so I am hopeful and interested to see, as things kind of shift back to a different but closer to pre-pandemic reality, what shape volunteerism plays in that. But yes, our partners are in person for sure.
Is that true for others? Sarah, are you seeing that as well?
We are, you know, we're seeing, I think, even our, we do some like cultural performances where volunteers can serve as ushers at community theaters and things like that. And I think those have kind of been our last one now to start coming back. And we're seeing that this summer. And I think, you know, Dahlia's point that there's just a lot of this that, and I think Chris said it too, there's just a lot of this that can't be done virtually. And especially when you think about volume of numbers of volunteers, that office support, that skills base, those are often one volunteer opportunities. Whereas moving all of that, of the food at a food pantry or cleaning up the garden or packaging books, whatever it is, that takes more people. So I think that there is a greater need when we look at that in-person service because of that hands-on nature, and where that, you know, a lot of these community organizations have relied on volunteers to get that aspect of their work done for so many years, that they're definitely looking for people to come back into that. You know, so they all have their varying degrees of safety precautions in there. You know, if you're going to be outside in a garden, it's probably going to feel a lot like it did before the pandemic. But if you're working in a kitchen that's serving critically ill individuals, you're still going to be masked. You're going to be asked to provide proof of vaccination, and it's going to feel, you know, a little different than it did before.
Joseph, is that pretty much what you're seeing?
Yeah, some of our opportunities obviously need to be in person. So, you know, the need for that, we are seeing, whether it's food delivery, and obviously teaching folks how to use public transportation obviously has to be in person, but our companionship services, our volunteers want to be with their clients. Like, we have volunteers who do medical escorts, which is a huge, actually picked up very early on as older adults needed to get to appointments. So we are seeing that across the board in all of our volunteer programs.
Are there things that you would like to see that you haven't yet seen? Are there things that you hope would come out of this beyond what we're seeing? Don't all speak at once.
I think one thought that comes to mind is, you know, I know, and I agree with what everyone just said, that I think things are turning back to this in-person model. And I was in a meeting with an executive director of a nonprofit in Western Mass, and she said, you know, we are a human services organization and we want to serve humans face to face. So there is that component. I think that virtual volunteering opens up a lot of doors, however. I just saw that there was someone on the call from Virginia. I think that, I would love if nonprofits could keep that open mind of saying, we don't necessarily need to engage volunteers in our communities. We can be open to finding volunteers in other parts of the country or other parts of the world. See Palm Beach. I wish I was there right now. But, and especially there are, and before the pandemic, I was actually working with the Boys and Girls Club of Lowell, and they were engaging volunteers in Egypt and in Portugal to provide ESOL services to their youth. So they were doing virtual volunteering long before this, but I encourage nonprofits to think about that and think widely around how they can engage sort of volunteers virtually to help continue to meet and enhance their program impact. So that's just one piece that comes to mind, even though I do know and recognize that the in-person is definitely coming back as well.
Rosemary, you have a question. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask it? Can you unmute yourself, Rosemary? Maybe not. The question she has is that she would like to, Rosemary is from Palm Beach, Florida, and she would like to know what percentage of volunteer programs are subsidized, like the Senior Companion and AmeriCorps Senior Programs. I guess that's Joseph for you.
Yeah. So two of the 4 programs are AmeriCorps Senior programs. Not sure exactly what you mean by percentage, but two of the 4 are AmeriCorps Senior programs.
Okay, others are, I know you do AmeriCorps programs, Chris, others? AmeriCorps is subsidized through federal grants.
Yes.
Rosemary, did that answer your question? Rosemary? Okay, we can't hear you for some reason. It looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Are there other questions? Type them into the chat. We'd love to get answers from our panel. Anybody want to unmute yourself and speak up?
Doug, I've tried to unmute myself.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay. I asked the question because we don't have down here very many programs such as Senior Companions, AmeriCorps grants, and so forth. And I just wondered whether the fact that volunteers receive some kind of subsidy or reimbursement for expenses tends to keep people more engaged than volunteers who do not. And I ask that because, as you may know, I started an RSVP program in Hartford, Connecticut 50 years ago. And it did serve to keep people engaged rather than people who are just giving their time. Have I made myself clear?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's true for us. With our Senior Companion program, we offer a stipend of $3 an hour to volunteers. And that's because they are in the home and it's more of a commitment. So they're required to volunteer at least 5 hours a week. I think that stipend helps our volunteers in huge ways. So it is an incentive, whether it's paying for prescriptions or other needs that they have themselves. Same thing of the RSVP program with out-of-pocket reimbursement. I think that's a big selling point in getting volunteers on those programs, but also keeping them on as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the panel? Just unmute yourself and speak up or put it in the chat.
Hi, this is
Yeah.
Judy.
Judy, go ahead.
I just want to comment about the previous speaker, Rosemary. I volunteered, and I put that in quotes so you can't see me, or worked, I don't know which one, for many, many years for in New York City for an organization called Reserve.
Mhm.
And I'm sure you are familiar with it. I don't know if it's in Boston.
Used to be.
I'm very new in Boston. I'm here half-time and half-time in New York. The reason why that was lovely, aside from the money was nice, but the jobs that they tended, or the volunteer opportunities that they tended to offer, were really awesome. And that is because, of course, the NGOs, and also there were city agencies, had to budget for it. You know, it was just, they actually had to say, what do I need, and really budget for that small, or for them maybe it was a large stipend. And so the jobs tended to be very real and very engaging. And I thought that was the advantage to something like Reserve. So that's just the comment.
Yeah, thank you, Judy.
Can I just comment on that?
Sure, sure.
We started off our program here trying to collaborate with Reserve out of Miami. And we found they were having problems getting funding. And I have since read that their funding has been cut back quite a bit. So they're not able to do as much as they could. And I think this is something that is affecting all programs that are similar, with some kind of subsidization, and is a problem that probably should be addressed at a higher level.
That sounds like a topic for another day. So, and that's a part of the engagement challenge, and it's a very real one. And I'm sure that each one of our panelists could speak to it. For those of you who may not know, Reserve used to be in Boston. In fact, I see Carol Greenfield, who used to run Reserve in Boston, brought it to Boston, and unfortunately no longer is a program in Boston, although it's a nationwide program that may have opportunities in Boston. But it, like many others that provided financial support, as you have suggested, it's a complication, and there are a lot of issues that are involved in volunteer engagement, regardless of whether there's a subsidy involved. So the question I'd like to ask the panel at this point is, what would you recommend to people over 50 who want to be engaged, but may be concerned about safety, protection, their health, and so on? Who wants to kick that? Who wants to get started on that round?
I'm happy to. I mean, first and foremost, from a public health lens, I think you need to do what you are most comfortable doing in the way that you are most comfortable doing it. That is number one. And so, even if you are excited to volunteer somewhere and that somewhere doesn't have a vaccine requirement in place anymore, or a mask requirement in place anymore, does not mean that you don't have to, you should still wear a mask if it makes you feel more comfortable, right? First and foremost. But I think moving forward, there are still going to be virtual opportunities, without question. And so it just might mean reframing what you think volunteerism is, because my prediction, right, is that those virtual opportunities are going to lend themselves to more skills-based support of organizational capacity type work, right? Whether that's in the realm of, committees and boards, or, special one-time projects. And that the hands-on volunteerism is going to start to kind of find its rhythm again. So I would say it just might be a little bit of a reframing around what opportunities are available and how you might be able to contribute.
Yeah, other skills-based opportunities might be bookkeeping, or might be fundraising, might be
Exactly. Yeah,
grant
helping,
writing, lots
yeah.
of ways to be involved.
Totally.
Great. Other thoughts? Sarah, you look like you were about to speak.
I agree with everything Dahlia said. And I think, our programs in particular, we have a page on our website where you can look, it's our COVID-19 page, and you can see which of our partners are requiring vaccinations. So if that is something that's of importance to you, you can find a project that way. And I think, continuing to find those virtual opportunities too, if you're not feeling like going out, but I think the good weather that's coming, hopefully, gives you some opportunity as well, where we're going to have spaces where you can work outside or open windows. That also helps on that health protection side.
Good. Joseph or Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
I'll just add that we've spent a great deal of time, because all of our volunteers are older adults, on keeping folks safe, whether that is virtually, hybrid, or back in person. All of our partners are great about taking precautions to keep all of our volunteers safe. So I would say we have some of the safest volunteer opportunities. So if you are interested and that is an issue for you, we can definitely work with you to have you volunteer safely.
Chris, last word?
Sure. Yeah, I'll echo everything that folks just mentioned. I think we do a lot to communicate out to our partners and those that we fund and train to really practice due diligence when working with volunteers and to assess the risk that goes into engaging volunteers in direct service. So whether that be requiring vaccines, requiring or providing PPE to those volunteers, or doing some sort of contact tracing, we sort of try to encourage our partners to think around that and ways that they can implement that. I also just wanted to, and I'm going to put a link in the chat box right now. We have our own volunteer connector site, which Doug and actually Sarah and Dahlia were in those initial conversations with us right before the pandemic. But this is a site that is exclusive to Massachusetts, and we have partners across the state who have helped push this out into their own networks. But it is a way to get involved and to find nonprofits around you that have volunteer opportunities related to causes that you may be passionate about. And the link that I specifically put in there allows you to find volunteer opportunities that are really catered to what you're looking to do regarding like the age that you are and where you're trying to serve. The type of work, there's actually in that type of work section, there's a virtual opportunity. So there are a bunch of different virtual opportunities if you're not necessarily comfortable going back to in-person volunteering. And you can also filter around, the capacity that you have, whether that be the frequency or the when or the training that is required of you to go and volunteer. So I would definitely encourage you all, if you are interested in giving back, and whether that be in person or in virtual, to go on that site and just see what's around you as a way to just start thinking about, ways that you can start getting involved and ways that you can help give back to your time. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Do you want to talk about the platform that you operate as well, Dahlia? And then I'll ask Sarah and Joseph as well.
Absolutely. And I am more than happy to put it in the chat as well, although I don't have a nifty, unique URL here to share with you. So it's a very long link, and my apologies for that. But we call it Volunteer HQ, not that dissimilar to what Chris talked about. You're able to filter by opportunity, community, etc. We post opportunities, but but nonprofits from across, it's mainly Massachusetts and New Hampshire also post opportunities, and it's very clear you can filter by virtual or otherwise. And some are ongoing, some are one time. It's all there, and you can sign up directly for the volunteer shift. and similarly, you can filter by focus area or geography, you know, et cetera. So I think they're all relatively similar in terms of the platform, but that is ours. Yeah.
And Dolly, you also have the Board Connection program. Do you want to
We
say a word?
do. Yeah, so that's different in that it's a training, it's a introductory training program to become a board member. So for folks who are interested in board service and unsure necessarily what the nuts and bolts of that look like, it's a 4 or 5 session program that runs one time in the spring. It's just wrapping up actually for this spring. It'll run again in the fall, open to all, to learn everything from, you know, governance to fundraising to, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then at the end of the program, we have a board matching night, I think, just because they happen to happen at night in the evening. And you can think of that almost like speed dating for board service. So, you know, there you kind of select, after you've completed the program, you select about 8 organizations that have piqued your interest, and you do sort of this little speed dating session and to learn more and see what it is that organization is looking for, and if there's a match there in terms of opportunity and skill set. And we've seen really great success. A lot of nonprofits have found really fantastic board members through this program, and folks feel prepared, right, to serve on a board. They also feel prepared to ask the right questions, to know if they're walking into something that is a real super sharp ship, or something that maybe is a little bit needs a little bit of work, and you know, so that you know sort of what you're getting into before arriving. So yeah.
The board matching event is next week, so you can find out more about that on our website. And when the program rolls around again in the fall, you'll also find out about that on our website. Sarah, can you tell us about the matching program that you have?
Sure. So Boston Cares, I'll drop our website in. Usually our homepage is kind of the best place to go to get a sense of what the opportunities are. And we have a page that's ways to volunteer that will link you to our calendar that I talked about, our Allies for Immigrants program. We do have a virtual page there. And then, as I mentioned, the COVID page will kind of give you some of that information on who's having kind of what restrictions in place. But the first step is to attend a new volunteer orientation through our Zoom. So you can create an account and sign up for an orientation, and they'll give you that's about an hour on Zoom. And after that, you get kind of the lay of the land on how our policies work, what our programs are, how to navigate the website. And then it's really self-driven from there. You can pick and choose where you want to engage, whether it's signing up for an Allies for Immigrants training, or you know, just picking and choosing some things on the calendar as it fits your schedule. So it's really self-driven once you attend that orientation.
And we'll send these links to you, so you don't have to copy them down. It's you can save the chat, but we'll also send the links along to you. Thank you, Sarah. And Joseph.
Yeah, I will also include a link. I'll just note that our website is being redone to have all of our volunteer opportunities under one, but on the link that I'll send, you can click on our volunteer opportunities and outline each one with a job description, sort of what that opportunity entails, and then you can apply straight on the website or call us for more information.
Great, good. Tim asked a question about the online training programs that organizations offer, that you offer. And he's asking about, how do you ensure compliance? How do you know that people have actually gone through the program and know what they need to do to take on the role? Anybody want to respond to that briefly?
I can take a stab at that. From what I see from our programs and from our partners is sort of just sending out some sort of survey or kind of like a quiz, almost like a 5-question quiz that can sort of just like confirm that they watched the orientation or they watch the training, like 5 basic questions that they otherwise wouldn't know. And that is sort of like a way that they can confirm it. And I do believe that Zoom allows you, if you send out a Zoom recording or a Zoom link, that you can see the folks who have watched the recording. So that's another way that you can just track to ensure that folks have watched. And
Thank you, Chris. And Cynthia has mentioned the Shine program, which is a wonderful program that gives people an opportunity to learn about and then to help others understand the Medicare program and some of the other healthcare choices that people face. So thank you to our panel, Sarah and Dahlia and Joseph and Chris, for the time and your expertise and giving us a sneak peek into what we can expect the future of volunteering to look like. And I suspect that next year, this time, if not before, we'll be thinking differently, probably based on what happens between now and then, because I think this is probably a place that will continue to evolve as circumstances change. I just want to, first of all, thank all of you for being a part of this program today. We will send the recording, as I mentioned, as well as links and copy of the chat, so you'll have all that information in a few days. I want to call your attention to a program next week called Taming the Voices in Your Head. This is for people who are thinking about reinventing themselves in the way that they do work, from an employment kind of arrangement to possibly freelance or consulting or contract work or gig work or remote work, some of the same issues involved that we talked about this morning. And that will be next Wednesday from 10 to 11, and a number of other programs coming up, which you can find by taking a look at our website, EncoreBostonNetwork.org. So thanks again to our panel. Thanks to all of you, and have a wonderful afternoon.